Okay, I think we are live now. Kimmy will tell me otherwise if we're not. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Guy Gazzoni. I have the honor of chairing the Budget and Tax Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 2nd, and this is a public hearing. We have 10 bills on the schedule today. Couple little reminders. Of course, the sponsor takes the time that they will need to introduce the bill. And after that, their first witness, referred to as their sort of expert witness, can have a few extra minutes. But in general, those who are testifying have 2.5 minutes. And since we still haven't quite figured out how to time it, I'm doing the timing. And I'll just jump in when the time is right. I think that is about it. So thank you for all who have joined us to listen in, and for those who are here to testify. We're going to begin with Senator Kramer, Climate Crisis and Education Act, Senate Bill 76. Senator Kramer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. After a rather cold and snowy 2 or 3 days, I thought to myself, what could I possibly do to help warm the hearts of the Budget and Tax Committee? And I said, let me bring a bill over there so that I can spend some time with them and make them feel better about the inclement weather we've had. So here I am, committee, to
I move unfavorable.
All righty then. I'm here to introduce, I do love Senator King, by the way. Senate Bill 76, the Climate Crisis and Education Act. Committee, this is a bill that is going to be a little bit familiar. I heard it last year. It is probably one of the most significant environmental initiatives being heard in the Maryland legislature, which is clearly why it's before the Budget and Tax Committee. But at the end of the day, not only is it a dramatic piece of environmental legislation to improve dramatically the environment and push back against the climate crisis, it is also an opportunity to raise significant revenues to help the state begin to address the climate crisis that is knocking on our door. I won't get into the environmental aspects of it unless you're one of the extreme deniers. I know this committee realizes the climate crisis is here, the damage that it is already wreaking on our state. We are second only to Louisiana with interior coastlines, and we are already seeing the degradation and the loss of land all throughout those coastlines in Maryland. And the expectation is that devastation will grow far more significantly if we do not act, and if we don't act now. So let's get to the financial piece of what the bill is about. The bill would require, for the first time, the fossil fuel industry would start to take financial responsibility for the pollution that they have been spewing for more than a century. The fossil fuel industries inside information, their own research, as early as the 1950s now, we have learned, was showing what implications there might be from burning fossil fuels. That information became more and more apparent to them, and as it did, the fossil fuel industry began spending significant sums on denying it, misleading, trying to make it sound as if it was junk science. And now, as we have the worst wildfires we've ever seen on the West Coast, the worst hurricane seasons ever experienced on the East Coast, I think it's very clear. We know exactly what the climate crisis means and what burning fossil fuels has done. Having said that, we have all paid the price of the fossil fuel industry's pollution. This legislation, as mentioned, would be for the first time, let's let the fossil fuel industry start to pay the cost, to help lift the burden that is our responsibility as state government to offset the damage that is occurring and will be happening in the future because of pollution. So it simply requires that the fossil fuel industry pay a per metric ton price for pollution. And what that means to us as a state is that, courtesy of the fossil fuel industry, we will have billions with a B of dollars start investing in protecting the state. And it begins with, in the bill, $350 million a year. Thank you, fossil fuel industry, that will be dedicated to Kerwin initiatives. Why do we want to do that? Because we are saddling the next generation and the generation after that and the one after that with cleaning up the mess that they are now inheriting. They are inheriting a world that is in crisis, and it's going to be up to them to try to figure out how it is we are going to stop. And if possible, we don't know whether it's possible, but give them the education to find out, if possible, begin to reverse the damage and the harm, as opposed to trying to figure out how we're going to survive with the damage that's already occurred and is imminent. So we will have $350 million a year, every year, dedicated to educating our children to help save the planet. It will also provide millions of dollars for resiliency infrastructure. This is going to be significant, and it already is, for our Eastern Shore communities. Worcester, Wicomico, Somerset, Dorchester, they are already losing shoreline. Major realty entities have acknowledged this is going to cost billions of dollars in lost real estate if we do not figure out a way to get the resources to build resilience. Crisfield is already experiencing routine flooding that is expected in the next 20 years to be dramatic. Do you think the folks in Crisfield have the financial resources to build seawalls and jetties to protect their shoreline? They don't. Ocean City does not have the resources to be replenishing beach and trying to stop additional erosion. We are going to need money as a state. The city of Annapolis does not have the financial resources to take on the routine flooding that is now happening here in Annapolis. Baltimore City is going to have to address this and build resiliency to protect Baltimore from the damage that is already here. So part of this fund, thank you, fossil fuel industry, you caused it. Now you're going to help pay to build the resiliency to protect our state from what you've done. It will provide hundreds of millions of dollars for environmental justice. We know that it is our minority and low-income communities that have suffered the most from what it is the fossil fuel industry has done. Whether it's health or lack of opportunities in our minority communities to access quality health care, they have suffered more than the population as a whole. Things like asthma, a direct consequence of pollution, far greater in our minority communities. So they have been hit harder and they don't have the resources. This bill provides those resources so that we can begin to address the environmental injustice of the fossil fuel industry. It will provide millions of dollars for renewable energy and to help us deal with energy efficiency, opportunities for everyone to make changes to their lifestyles to use less energy and make our state less dependent on fossil fuels. And the bottom line is, this is not a money grab by the state at all. And the bill is very clear about that, because what we don't use for building our infrastructure and what we don't use for education, what we don't use for environmental justice, that money is going to be going to lower and middle class families as a routine check in the mail. So the fossil fuel industry, when they pay the cost of their pollution to the state, is going to provide the opportunity to send a check in the mail to low-income families, to middle-class families, and we're going to say, hey, please use this money to make energy efficiency improvements in your home, in your lifestyles, to your, whether it's replacing windows, adding insulation, updating heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. They will get a routine check in the mail, and that money goes right back into local economies, to local businesses, to stimulate Maryland's small business community. It's a great incentive to people to make changes and boost our local economies.
Sounds comprehensive, Senator.
Yes, I will just finally wrap up by saying there's also a portion of this that will go to our businesses. It will be targeted particularly at manufacturing and agriculture, to help reduce their energy expenses and costs, help move them into the 21st century with energy efficiency, to transition to a green economy. And finally, there's a provision in the bill that will have a gas guzzler fee. The money that comes in from the gas guzzler fee will go back out as a rebate to those people who are buying electric vehicles, and to provide resources for electric infrastructure, electric buses. With that, Mr. Chair, committee, I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. Couple things. One, Senator Lamb has also joined us today. He's on EHE, of course, and they are jointly referred. So we welcome you, Senator. Also, for our viewing audience, these senators leave the screen at times. We all have bills and other committees that we have to run off and do. So that's what occurs a lot of times when you see maybe some flash up where there's a senator's screen they're not actually sitting there. It's because they're off doing the business of the legislature in another committee. So
Mr. Chairman, real fast, if I may, having got cut off just a little too soon, I failed to, very important piece of this bill. The bill provides that those costs from the fossil fuel industry, from the petroleum industry, cannot be passed down to the consumers. Done.
Gotcha. Drop the mic. I gotcha. All right. So first up is Wandra Ashley Williams.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Gazzoni and members of the committee. My name is Wandra Ashley Williams, and I am the Regional Director for Climate Exchange, and want to take this opportunity to thank Senator Kramer for introducing this very, very important bill. Over the past few months, a couple of years, we've been building a coalition of partners in support of the Climate Crisis and Education Act, the CCEA, the Rebuild Maryland Coalition. And it includes organizations from climate, environmental groups, businesses, faith-based, labor, civil rights, research, education, as well as student groups. The coalition's number one principle is to put people first, do no harm, and to protect low and moderate income households. As we figure out how to rebuild Maryland after experiencing the worst public health and environmental, health and economic, crises in history, the COVID-19 pandemic, we have an opportunity to design and enact state legislation that will address the devastating crises. Maryland can rebuild in a way that addresses the systemic challenges that have for too long impacted some of the most vulnerable communities in our state, Black and Brown communities. We must embrace a green recovery that prioritizes justice, meaningful job creation, and a low carbon economic future. We accept that climate justice, racial justice, and environmental justice are intertwined and provide a foundation for a policy designed to rebuild Maryland's economy. The new federal administration under President Joe Biden certainly signals a return to science-based policy making that is a much needed break from the climate denial we have been dealing with for the past 4 years. However, we in Maryland must continue to push forward policies at the state level that can get us the emissions reduction and economic vitality we desperately need here in the state. This bill is a critical step for the future of Maryland. The bill protects those who have been most burdened by the impact of pollution by ensuring communities can come out ahead. Critical state initiatives and policies will be needed to tackle the ongoing economic recovery efforts in a way that incorporates climate and environmental justice priorities. The bill sets a new statewide greenhouse gas reduction goal of 60% by 2030 and net zero by 2045. It also generates billions of dollars, and I won't rehash all of that because our senator did a great job explaining the proceeds from the fee that will be charged. But I will just highlight a few benefits and provisions from the CCA. It does establish the 3 funds for household and employer benefits, green infrastructure, and education in the state. A gradually increasing price on carbon pollution for energy and fossil fuel companies, while including that no pass-through provision that protects consumers that Senator Kramer just explained to us. We think that is a fantastic provision in the bill. And it incentivizes renewable energy, which tends to be locally produced, which generate jobs nearby in economic vitality and huge investment in the public goods. So the CCA would make Maryland a national leader in climate legislation that will both tackle the urgent need to reduce carbon pollution emissions while at the same time raising much needed revenue to fund education and green infrastructure. Most importantly, the bill includes the just transition and green industrial revolution benefits for our consumers and low-income communities. For these reasons, and those that were expressed by Senator Kramer, Climate Exchange and Rebuild Maryland Coalition urge a favorable report on SB 76. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Jamie DeMarco.
Hello, Jamie DeMarco with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. On behalf of our members across Maryland, we strongly urge a favorable report on this bill. This is the climate bill we have all been waiting for. This is the one that solves the problem. It doesn't just commit us to solving the problem, it implements the policy that will reduce emissions. The latest science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says Maryland needs to reduce our emissions 60% by 2030 and be net zero by 2045. That's what this bill does. And as everyone on this committee knows, things cost money, and it's hard to find where money comes from. This bill, I think, is expertly, as the sponsor, Senator Kramer, put it, making sure that those who knew about the problem, who lied about the problem, and who are causing the problem, the fossil fuel CEOs and shareholders, are exclusively paying the cost to make this transition. There's a lot that we can do at zero cost. I mean, wind and solar plus batteries today are cheaper than fossil fuels. The Dickerson coal plant has closed and is being replaced megawatt for megawatt with solar plus battery storage. The clean energy transition is happening, but there are some things that require money. We need to protect the workers who have powered our society and turned the lights on, made sure the lights turn on for decades. We need to protect communities that have been overburdened by fossil fuel production and refineries and combustion. And there are certain policies that just cost money to reduce emissions. The furnace in my home was installed in the 90s. And there are gas furnaces being installed in homes today that, if we don't do something, are going to be operating after 2045. Other than paying someone to swap out a gas furnace for an electric heat pump, there's very few policies you can implement that will successfully decarbonize the building sector. This is the plan. It protects consumers through prohibiting the cost being passed on to consumers, and by writing consumers a monthly check to or a regular check to make sure that costs are offset. This is the bill. It's just, it's equitable, and it's specific and ambitious. Thank you. We urge a favorable report.
Thank you so much. Next up, pleased to see former Secretary of Education under President Obama, John King. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much, Chairman and committee members, and appreciate Senator Kramer's leadership on this issue. My name is John King. I'm testifying today in support of Senate Bill 76. As a resident of Silver Spring, a father to 2 daughters, and as the founder of Strong Future Maryland, an organization working to address systemic inequality and promote a sustainable, just, and prosperous economic future for all Marylanders. Just a few weeks ago, an international group of scientists warned the planet is facing a, quote, ghastly future of mass extinction, declining health, and climate disruption upheavals, end quote. We've all heard this language before, and yet we aren't heeding the call. As one of the wealthiest states and one of the wealthiest countries in the world, in a location that is uniquely susceptible to changing weather patterns, Maryland has a responsibility to lead with aggressive pollution reduction policies. We are also in the midst of a long overdue reckoning with issues of racial justice, and we must not ignore the intersection between the climate crisis and systemic racism. According to the EPA, communities of color and low-income communities in the U.S. are often disproportionately burdened by environmental and public health hazards and enjoy far fewer benefits from environmental programs and natural resources. In dozens of major US cities, including Baltimore, low-income neighborhoods are hotter than their wealthier counterparts and experience greater air pollution. Polls show that people of color, including Latinos and African Americans, are especially concerned about climate change. This legislation takes critical steps that heed the urgent call for climate action from our communities while helping to protect low and moderate income households during the transition. As a parent, I care profoundly about what kind of planet we will leave our children and our grandchildren. I believe that creating a climate crisis infrastructure fund is an important investment in the future. We can ensure that entities who bring fossil fuels into the state are contributing to offset the resulting impact, and we can address global warming while weaning our state off of carbon. In addition, we can put Maryland in a position of leadership on technological innovation for the future and grow the number of good green jobs. As a former teacher, principal, and United States Secretary of Education, I believe strongly that schools improve the lives of young people, are vital to the health of our democracy, and serve as an engine of economic mobility for individuals and communities. This legislation will provide a reliable additional funding stream for Maryland schools and help us to ensure that our kids are thriving. Maryland must take more ambitious climate action now in the name of environmental justice, for the health of our communities, and for the future of our families. This committee can make a commitment to that work by issuing a favorable report on SB 76. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Joshua Winston.
He's not here, Senator.
Okay. That ends the speakers on the proponent side. Any questions for the panel? Okay. Next up then is Kirk McCauley.
Thank you, Chairman Gazan. Members of the Budget and Taxation Committee, my name is Kirk McCauley. I represent WMDA, a trade association that represents service stations, convenience stores, and repair facilities. And also today I'm representing MAPTA, Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Distributors Association. WMDA and MAPTA oppose this massive and complicated piece of legislation that involves just about every state agency, makes Maryland Department of Environmental Secretary and administrator of a collection agency. Effects of this bill will ripple throughout the state and affect everyday life and activities. Not just individual homeowners, but counties, cities, colleges, hospitals, recreation facilities, and all businesses. Passage of this would mean some businesses will not survive, and homeowners will have to decide how to use their energy, whether to turn the AC on hot days or turn the heat up when it's cold at night. Especially those living week to week on their income, they cannot wait for a check. They cannot wait for a rebate. Retirees and those on fixed incomes and seniors will feel an overwhelming impact. Everything we do will get more expensive. Every item that is delivered to a retailer will be more expensive. The prohibition to pass cost of carbon tax to end user would force many independent retail businesses owners into bankruptcy. Gas stations, convenience stores, propane, and fuel distributors would all be affected. They wouldn't be able to pass the increases that they have along to the customer. They would be stuck and thus be in bankruptcy. But we urge an unfavorable report on SB 76, and I'll stick around and answer any questions I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Vince McAvoy.
Thank you so much, committee. I appreciate you hearing me on this. I am strongly opposed to this bill, this mishmash of different regulatory actions and different financial streams is a virtual nightmare. What I find particularly alarming about this is that it is, and even toward the tail end, as the bill goes on to explain that it will re-examine this in 2024, it admits that these are arbitrary metrics. I find that very troubling when we are going to be reducing the common person's energy supply, increasing taxes, and we're going to be impacting industries that I beg to differ with the senator. Um, this is not industries bringing energy and just waiting for it to sit. These are choices that Marylanders make. We use this energy. We use it so much that if we have a climate outage for some reason, a storm, electrical storm or snowstorm, we are wanting for this energy. We can't get enough of it. The essence of reducing any greenhouse issues, and I do, as someone who has been in the energy sector and been a consultant, I could tell you a number of ways that we should be looking at. We've taken so many broad strokes in this past year where we could reduce energy consumption and not really affect anything or anyone in very large ways. Maybe not toward a 25% decrease. Again, that number is arbitrary. These people who are telling us that we can spend money to eliminate climate change, I don't know how much money you have to spend to change the weather. I find that a very intriguing conundrum. So I just want to urge that the construct of moshing together this racial injustice issue, this issue that we need to reduce greenhouse when we don't have our unemployment rate in the state. We have industries and companies dying every day because of this self-inflicted COVID, shooting ourselves in the foot against industries. I think that this is not just wrong, it's extremely the wrong time. We need to take care of Marylanders and get ourselves back on an even keel before we start impacting 350 million. Divide that between our 6 million residents. What that would mean to us just in the state, it's unfathomable. And again, the bill is 24 pages. I can't go into all of it. I do want to thank you for your time, for listening. Like I said, I was in this industry. I remain available for questions.
Thank you. So those were our two in opposition witnesses. Any questions for that panel? Thank you all. Thank you, Senator, for bringing that to us. We're moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. Certainly welcome the opportunity to hold any conversations that you're interested in. Enjoy the day.
Thank you. Senate Bill 366, Senator McCray, Department of Assessments Taxation's Identification Number for Businesses Task Force. Senator McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of Budget and Tax. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District. I'm here on behalf of Senate Bill 366, which I believe is a very simple bill that simply creates a task force to coordinate a unique identifier amongst our respective businesses here in the state of Maryland. The task force, it will be made up of state agencies consist of the Department of Assessments and Taxation, the Maryland Department of Health, the Maryland Department of Labor, Department of Natural Resources, the Office of the Comptroller, and the Office of the Secretary. We're going to be joined by Administrator Higgs, who also believes that just from efficiency standpoint in the state of Maryland, that this will be a great idea to come out with ideas to make sure that our respective state agencies are moving in a uniform way in reference to how we coordinate around businesses. Mr. Chair, I ask for a favorable report in reference to Senate Bill 366 and look forward to any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Higgs, I'm guessing Corbett Webb is with you also.
Yep. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. The cross file is actually being heard right now, and Director Higgs was trying to testify on both, but they came up at the same time. So I'm going to be filling in for him this afternoon.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Senate Bill 366, and we want to thank Senator McCray for introducing this legislation. I don't want to repeat anything that he said, but just want to briefly explain how a unique Maryland ID number would benefit business owners and state agencies from SSTAT's perspective. Our department fields about 1,000 inquiries from business customers a day and reviews just as many filings. And oftentimes customers are confused as to whether the identification number they need is the SSTAT number, the EIN, the comptroller number, or another ID number issued by a different state or local agency. When filings are submitted with SSTAT, we frequently have to reject them because the customer puts a different ID number in the SSTAT ID number field, and having one unique Maryland ID number would make it significantly easier for these businesses to know that they're using the right number, and also make it easier for our department to inform customers what their identification number is. The long-term benefit of this legislation would be that although many state agencies service the same business customers, without a unique identifier, our IT systems can't easily talk to each other. Having one Maryland ID number would make it significantly easier to streamline business registration and maintenance processes in the future in ways that we haven't been able to consider yet, and would also assist with audit findings for probably all the agencies involved. This legislation will assist state agencies to determine what limitations each agency is faced with, whether that's IT systems, budget, or otherwise, and identify ways to overcome these hurdles. And the department, again, thanks the sponsor for kind of getting this conversation started with the task force, and requests a favorable report on this bill. And I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Questions for the Senator of the panel? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, just a comment. I hope that my colleagues don't hold it against Director Higgs that they were over in the House of Delegates versus the Senate.
At the moment,
I will clarify, we made a split-second decision. We thought we were going third, so he was going to jump back here in time.
as a matter of fact, at the moment, it's actually an advantage. Senator Rosenthal actually has a question.
Thank you. Well, first, it sounds like a terrific bill and a terrific cause, and I congratulate the sponsor. I congratulate everyone working on it. My question is, what's the problem in doing it? And what are the challenges? Why can't we just do it?
Well, I think it's a coordination of the agencies per se. I'll let Mr. Webb from SSTAT elaborate on it, but I think that it's just mainly in respects to aligning all of the agencies, getting them in on the same page and making sure that they can talk through any issues. But I'll let Mr. Webb elaborate on it.
Sure, and thank you, Senator Rosenthal. So, there's been a lot of interagency collaborations over the past couple of years, particularly through the governor's cabinet level task forces. And this is absolutely something that we're going to probably pursue with or without this legislation. But this is a great way to get the conversation started, get all the agencies moving, and really set it as that priority for the state and for the agencies involved.
I get that, and I think policy direction is good on this, and so I really do thank the senator for taking this. But at a more practical level, I mean, are there particular road bumps on this? It's going to take like 10 years to redo everybody's computer system, or that's kind of my question.
Sure, and I think probably IT systems are going to be the main limitation involved here. But a lot of state agencies, and you've read about some of them in the news, that they're in the middle of their modernization efforts right now. Our department is working on one for our business entity system. The timeline for that, it might be over the next 5 years, but now is the time to kind of get the conversation going. But IT systems are probably one of the limitations that we'll be facing.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next bill. Senator McCray again, 362, Transportation Highway User Revenues, Revenue and Distribution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And thank you, members of the committee. For the record, Corey McCray again, Senator for the 45th Legislative District. I come to you in reference to our highway user revenue money. I'm honored to be able to be passed the torch from our former Senator, Andrew Serafini, who has in the past carried this bill. I think that we've all are familiar with it. In 2010, we went through very tough challenges in our respective state, and we had to make hard cuts. 2018, it was this legislature that moved us in the right direction in reference to our highway user revenue monies. And one of the things that we would like to achieve from Senate Bill 362 is not only getting the extra bump, but also removing the sunset that would happen within fiscal year 2024. So the sunset is an important provision of it. There's a provision also to make sure that the funding for the state would not be affected for 3 years. So it would not be affected until after fiscal year 2024, I should say. But just for those that may not know, our highway user revenue monies are derived from the gasoline and motor vehicle revenues account, basically coming from titling in our gasoline dollars. In 2010, it was basically a 70 to 30% share with our respective local governments. 2018, we were able to at least get it to 86.5% to a 13.5% share. And what this would do is, if this sunset isn't done, it would basically take our local governments to 9.6% from our state government and 90.4% falling on to local governments in reference to the share of their policy. Mr. Chair, I'll stop talking. I know that we have a number of local government experts that can speak to this issue, but I would ask my colleagues for a favorable report with Senate Bill 362.
Thank you, Senator. Bill George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Senator McCray for sponsoring this bill. My name is Bill George. I'm with the Maryland Municipal League in support of Senate Bill 362. I know that we also, I believe, have our legislative committee chair testifying in a little bit, so I will leave many of those details for him to outline from the municipal perspective. What I will say is regarding the funding sunset after fiscal year 24, I understand that this committee of all the committees understands the value of long-term fiscal planning. And while municipalities are required by state law to only do annual budgets, that doesn't preclude them from behind the scenes doing longer term revenue and spending forecasts for particularly some of their larger infrastructure projects. And with the sunset written into state law after fiscal year 24, it is proving very difficult at this point for them to do any sort of longer term planning for these road projects. When they go to secure financing, there's a giant drop only a few years down the line. Just for reference, if that fiscal cliff were to remain in place, municipalities in totality would go down to about $7.5 million to spread among all 157 municipalities, whereas now we're sitting at about 37.5 million. So with that, thank you again to the committee for your work on this bill last year and passing a version of it out of the committee and through the Senate chamber. I am happy to answer any sort of technical questions, but with that, I will pass it off to the next witness at the chair's discretion and ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Jake Romanell, if I'm saying that right.
Yes, you are. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Gazzoni and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony this afternoon. And thank you to Senator McCray for sponsoring this bill. I am Jake Romanell, Vice President of the Town Council of Newmarket. But I'm here today in my capacity as Chair of the Maryland Municipal League's Legislative Committee. MML strongly supports Senate Bill 362. Increasing funding and removing the 2024 sunset provision is our top priority this year. As I'm sure we all remember, back in August of 2009, local governments lost 96% of their highway user revenues with no ability to replace the monies that were eliminated from our budgets. Since that time, MML has been working diligently to recover our transportation monies. Under Governor Hogan's leadership in his first 4 state budgets, there was an additional infusion of $90.4 million for municipalities. This was very helpful, but still has not filled the hole. In 2018, MML's membership came together and were successful in advocating for the passage of legislation that restored 85% of municipal HURs, beginning with the fiscal year 2020 state budget. This legislation passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. While we are extremely grateful for 5 years of funding, The statute is only in effect until FY 2024, when the additional funding sunsets. And HURs will go from the current level of approximately $39 million to approximately $9 million. That $9 million is supposed to serve the transportation needs of 157 municipalities. This year, with the impacts of COVID, our budgetary needs are even greater. We simply cannot afford this sunset. This committee gave a favorable report to this bill in the 2020 session, and we again ask for your support. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Drew Jabin.
Hi, thank you. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Drew Jabin on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties here in support of SB 362. You do have MACO's written testimony, so I'll keep this brief. This is an issue that is perpetually at the top of the county priority list. You've heard from the sponsor and MML about the importance of the bill. It takes an appropriate next step in terms of highway user revenues by eliminating the coming cliff effect following a multi-year advance in local funding. This forward-thinking approach for local transportation needs is super important. Avoiding the dramatic cliff effect is important, and MACO requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. And last on the list is Natasha Mayhew.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Natasha Mayhew here on behalf of Baltimore City Mayor's Office in support of Senate Bill 362. I want to thank the sponsor and my fellow panelists for all their hard work on this critically important bill. Baltimore City receives the largest share of local HUR aid of any locality in Maryland because we are the only jurisdiction responsible for maintaining all state highways within our boundaries. HUR shares coming from the state to the city peaked in 2007 at $227 million. And then during the height of the Great Recession, it fell drastically, bottoming out at $128 million in 2010. This reduction resulted in a loss of more than $850 million in cumulative revenue that is desperately needed to reinvest in the city's aging infrastructure. We are extremely appreciative of the increase in funding that came about in 2018 and really want to see this funding continue. And as the previous panelist noted, that there isn't a cliff. The HUR funds must be used by us for eligible transportation related uses, including street construction or maintenance, transportation facilities, street cleaning, stormwater drainage, maintenance of footpaths and bicycle trails, all things that it would be very important for the city to continue to receive this funding to invest in. And so for these reasons, we seek a favorable report on Senate Bill 362.
Thank you very much. Questions for the Senator or the panel? Anyone? Okay, thank you all very much. Senator Peters, Senate Bill 370, income tax subtraction modification, military and public safety retirement income.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill that we all co-sponsored except for the new member and went through the Senate unanimously last year and died in the House because we ran out of time. So this is our bill that takes the public safety individuals and the military and brings them all from $15,000 to $20,000 for income tax subtraction. And it also fixes the penalty that the public safety first responders get when they get an offset with Social Security. This incorporates all the amendments we had last year. It's the bill that we passed out. And it's the fiscal note is $5.4 million. And as you know, the governor passed down between military retirement and hometown heroes $25 million. So it is my feeling that we could get a lot accomplished here with just 25% of that money and make it work. So that's the bill in a nutshell, and I've got only one witness, which is Mr. Jeff Buttle, who's the Professional Firefighters of Maryland president. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Buttle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see everybody. Jeff Buttle, President of the Professional Firefighters of Maryland. We represent over 10,000 career firefighters and paramedics across the state of Maryland. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the bill here this afternoon and be mindful of the committee's time. I know you have a number of bills still left to go. I'll just thank the returning members of the committee who all not only co-sponsored it, but unanimously passed it out of committee. And then certainly to the entire Senate who unanimously passed it off of the Senate floor. We got this bill out of committee timely last year prior to crossover, and unfortunately the pandemic hit, and just a few days after crossover, unfortunately the General Assembly had to adjourn early, which just simply didn't leave us enough time over in the House to be able to have the conversations with them. But looking forward to working with the committee again. Happy to work outside of this formal meeting, and I thank you for the time this morning.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Buttle or the senator? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next bill up is mine. It is Senate Bill 413, Maryland Legal Services Corporation Funding Abandoned Property Fund. So the Maryland Legal Services Corporation provides low-income Marylanders with legal assistance for evictions and foreclosures, which of course that's been a lot in the news for the last year, but they also do family law, consumer law, access to benefits, and a number of other things, providing a civil right to counsel. Some years ago, the legislature, in its wisdom, and it was very thoughtful actually, came up with 3 buckets of money that help support these efforts. And one was interest on lawyers' trust accounts. One had to do with some filing fee charges. And then the third had to do with abandoned property money. During the pandemic and changes in the economy with interest rates, what is referred to as IOLTA, that interest rate on lawyer trust, essentially came down to 0. And then, of course, the courts were closed, and so filing fees weren't happening. So that essentially came down to 0. So all that was left was the money that we give through the Abandoned Property Fund. It's a fund that generates a significant amount of money every year, and a very small portion of that, I think we're at $2 million now, goes to Maryland Legal Services Corporation for these purposes. The rest of that money goes to the general fund. What this bill does is up the amount of money from the Abandoned Property Fund because of the lack of money being generated from the other 2 sources. And the expectation is for the 22 budget that they're going to be short $6 million if we don't do something. And that's why this bill goes from $2 to $8 million. Let me also put into context that there's been a lot of discussion about this, largely because, again, the evictions issue over the last year. Senator Hettleman has a bill that was heard in JPR the other day. I don't know if the Attorney General has another bill which also tries to attach or increase the amount of fees for filing on landlords who are taking people to eviction to generate money. The reason I'm laying this all out for the committee is that with all those, with several of these ideas out there, I hope that we will, and all of them will eventually come back to us one way or another because we're jointly assigned. We need to, at the end of the day, figure out the best way to ensure that these services continue, in my mind, for those low-income individuals who really deserve representation in our court system. course, not only do they deserve it, it also actually helps speed up the process in the court system. It actually saves the judicial system time and money because of the fact that they are represented. So with that, I'm not going to say any more. There are a number of witnesses. First up is Susan Ehrlichman, who is with Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Susan, you can begin your testimony.
Chairman Guzoni, Vice Chair Rosa Pepe, members of the committee, I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here today and speak to you in favor of Senate Bill 413. A little bit of background on Maryland Legal Services Corporation. We were created by the state of Maryland, by the Maryland General Assembly back in 1982 for the purpose of securing funding and providing grants to legal aid providers throughout the state so that low-income Marylanders would have access to civil legal aid when they needed it. We currently fund 36 grantee organizations. Last year, these programs served over 182,000 clients in a variety of civil legal matters. As Chairman Guzoni indicated, certainly included eviction prevention and foreclosures, but the services provided by our grantees are much more varied than that, and also impact folks who have child custody problems or facing needing protection against domestic violence. They're having problems getting their unemployment insurance, food stamps, consumer debt, a variety of matters, all of which have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And nowhere has this been felt more impactfully than in low-income communities and communities of color. So the reason we're here today is the inverse effect the pandemic has had on these problems, in that the need is skyrocketing at the time the funding to address these needs is plummeting, as Chairman Guzoni so aptly described. So we have these three funding sources. IOLTA, strictly interest income, we've lost 70% of that funding. And that is always a volatile source of funding, even in better times. Also, filing fee surcharges, usually a fairly stable source of funding, certainly not during a pandemic where courts had to close and filings remain at historic lows. So truly the only stable source of funding that MLSC receives every year is the distribution from the state's abandoned property fund. We are seeking to increase that by $6 million. And I'd like to point out that with the enactment of Senate Bill 413, with that increase of $6 million, we would still be looking at money directed to MLSC that represents approximately 7% of the abandoned property fund. And I raise that because when you can contrast that to the percentage of the fund MLSC received when this was first enacted, which was many years ago, the Maryland General Assembly in 1984 identified abandoned property revenue as an appropriate source of funding for MLSC. And at that time, the amount of money that was distributed to MLSC was far greater percentage-wise. It was about 17% of the funding that was generated in the abandoned property fund. So enactment of this bill, once again, as Chairman Guzoni indicated, would eliminate the need for further reductions that MLSC would have to make at a time when the need has never been greater. Honestly, this bill does not solve all our problems. As you've heard, and as you know, the needs are just increasing exponentially, and all this bill will do, although it's a big all, is eliminate the need for MLSC to cut grants to these providers at a time that they've never seen a greater demand. It would also provide and increase the stable funding that MLSC receives, and that's something that's desperately needed. Lastly, I'd just like to say that funding for civil legal aid is not only an important thing to do, the right thing to do, it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. We have studies in Maryland that show that for every dollar invested in civil legal aid, there's a $6 return on that investment in the form of economic activity, cost savings, and increased productivity. a return literally of hundreds of millions of dollars each year. So I would just like to conclude by emphasizing how critically important this measure is. It will truly impact the health, safety, and well-being of Marylanders in every jurisdiction in our state. And I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 413. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this important measure.
Thank you. Natalie McSherry.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Gazzoni and committee members. My name is Natalie McSherry. I'm actually wearing two hats here today. I am the board chair of Maryland Legal Services Corporation, and I am also the president-elect of the Maryland State Bar Association. The Maryland State Bar Association strongly supports efforts to make the civil justice system more accessible, more user-friendly, and more fair for all Marylanders. And this bill, Senate Bill 413, is a priority bill for the Maryland State Bar Association, as well as for its partner, which is the Maryland Access to Justice Commission. You have already heard from Chairman Gazzoni and from our executive director, Susan Ehrlichman, about how important this funding is to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. I want to talk for just a second about the need for civil legal services generally. This is a need that is great under normal circumstances, but as Susan said, the ongoing health and economic emergencies currently with the pandemic have made it far worse and have created whole new problems. Not everyone is aware of the fact that unlike criminal cases, there is no constitutional right to counsel in a civil legal dispute. So that in fact, even with those who are served by legal services, which are those who qualify for a multiplier of the poverty level, there's about 80% of our population that doesn't qualify for free legal counsel and can't afford a lawyer. So that you have an extremely large number of people under the best of circumstances appearing in court who are representing themselves and essentially unrepresented. Susan mentioned the studies that have shown that for every dollar invested in civil legal aid, it yields about $6 return in the economy. I will tell you, as Chairman Gazzoni has already mentioned, not only that, but it yields much improved efficiency in the legal system itself. Because any lawyer will tell you that appearing in court with the other party not represented takes more time, more effort, and frankly can lead to unfair results all around. The issues that are dealt with by the entities that are funded by Maryland Legal Services cover the full gamut of civil legal needs, everything from child custody cases, debt collection, housing, access to healthcare benefits, and so on. Anybody who tries to navigate that system without an experienced advocate is not only going to be less successful, but is going to cause problems within the system itself.
Ms. McSherry, if you could wrap up.
I will do that, sir. I simply ask you at a time when the economy and our public needs every help it can get. This is an investment certainly worth making, and I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 413. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dorothy Lenning.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dorothy Lennig. I'm the director of the Domestic Violence Legal Clinic at the House of Ruth. The House of Ruth serves victims of domestic violence throughout the state of Maryland, and we have offices in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. I'm here today to urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 413. I'm not going to repeat what any of the earlier speakers and our able chairman have already said, because they've described the problem and the issues very well. I just want to put a face on this for you. I'm going to describe a House of Ruth family law that's an example of the kind of representation that Maryland Legal Services Corporation supports. The House of Ruth represented a woman in her divorce who was both physically and sexually abused by her husband. And the case had some complicated legal issues. The parties purchased a home during their marriage, and both parties won the title to the home, so both of them owned it. But the husband pressured the wife into just putting her name on the mortgage, making her completely financially liable for the house. And even though the husband made more money than the wife, he didn't contribute at all to the finances of the household. And so eventually the wife fell behind on the mortgage and had to file for bankruptcy. She came to the House of Ruth. We were representing her in the divorce. And the House of Ruth attorney was able to successfully argue to the judge that the court should transfer the title of the house from both of them to just her so that she could live in the house apart from him and safe. In addition, the attorney was able to argue to the court that she should be awarded alimony, which was kind of unusual in this case because they hadn't lived together, they hadn't been married for that long, which is usually a requirement in an alimony case. But because of the financial differences and because of the bankruptcy, the attorney was able to help her with that. And finally, the attorney was able to get a real estate attorney to prepare the deed for this woman so that she could transfer the home from both of them to just her. And the attorney was able to do that for free. But here's the really important part. Using MLSC funding, this woman had a free, highly skilled divorce attorney who was also trained in handling domestic violence cases. So not only did we get her divorced, we helped get her safe from her abusive husband. Because of the relief that the attorney was able to get her, she's able to live with financial independence. And that's what MLSC funding does. While this woman might have been able to file for divorce by herself, it's unlikely that she would have gotten the relief that she needed to be financially secure and safe. So without stable funding, MLSC will have to cut grants. Last June, when MLSC did cut grants, one program ended up having to close. Luckily, because of some of the other programs, the Homeless Persons Representation Project, the Women's Law Center, Maryland Volunteer Lawyers, Midshore Pro Bono, they were able to pick up the cases and none of the existing clients were left without an attorney.
Ms. Lennox, if you could.
I doubt that would be the case if MLSC had to make more severe cuts. So we're urging a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lisa Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We are home to the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, which is a MLSC grantee. We provide legal services to survivors of sexual violence, including children, all around the state of Maryland. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for sponsoring this important legislation. I'm also not going to repeat what's already been said, but I do want to say this. The Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault is a coalition. And so we support rape crisis centers and other programs all over the state. At the beginning of the pandemic, we began to have 3 calls every single week. One with the attorneys from domestic violence and sexual assault programs, places like Hartley House, the Women's Law Center, Hope Works, CASA of Washington County. Another with all of the rape crisis center directors, places like For All Seasons, and a third with sexual assault and domestic violence victim advocates. Now the calls are monthly or bi-monthly, but we still talk to these people all across the state. And these coalition calls give us an on-the-ground, real-time perspective about how COVID is affecting legal services. The staff have been remarkable. They've moved services online. They've helped clients facing multiple issues. Some have become sick. Some have had family members die, but they still have persevered. But the pandemic has also affected perpetrators and survivors. Perpetrators are emboldened by the pandemic. They're using the pandemic to gain or renew access to victims. They're intimidating survivors into silence. They're interfering with survivors' attempts to seek safety and justice. And sexual assault survivors are facing increasing economic instability, homelessness, job loss, amplified trauma, all things that lead to a need for legal services. And that need is increasing. As an illustration, at Sally in December of 2019, they helped 183 survivors. In December 2020, they helped 318 survivors. That's an increase of 135 people, one December to the next. But it's more than that. For each case, not only do we have a survivor asking for, say, a protective order, but they also might now need help with eviction, with unemployment benefits, with all of the myriad issues that COVID is creating. And you all know, the next thing I'll say, everything takes longer. Every single thing we do takes longer, it's harder, it's more challenging for the people who need legal services. You have MCASA's written testimony. We have a number of examples of the sorts of cases that we handle, the sorts of Marylanders that we help with these funds. My colleague, Ms. Lennick, has given you a real example of how important it is, not just to have courts, but to have people who will help you in the courts. Senate Bill 143 is needed just to stay afloat and keep legal services available. We need more than that. The chair has referenced some of the other bills. I hope you address all of those, because we really need to work together. Legal services is part of the holistic response Maryland needs to have to COVID. So for those reasons, we urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 143.
Thank you. Kelly Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Gazzoni. Thank you for your time today. I will be brief. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kelly Thompson. I'm a supervising attorney for Catholic Charities Legal Network, which is a program of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington. So my agency is one of the largest and most comprehensive social service providers in the DC area, and we serve Montgomery, Prince George's, Calvert, Charles, and St. Mary's counties in Maryland. It's important to note that our doors are open to anyone in need, regardless of background, belief, or circumstance. And 2 of our 59 programs, the Legal Network and Immigration Legal Services, have been providing life-changing legal services to low-income Marylanders for over 30 years each. So as an established legal services provider in Maryland, Catholic Charities understands the importance that pro bono legal services make in the lives of low-income Marylanders. We've seen the increased need for services since the beginning of the pandemic. And as stated very nicely before, MLSC provides this critical funding to currently 36 legal services agencies throughout the state. And our collective ability to serve our clients means the difference between housing or homelessness, a job or joblessness, and chaos or stability and safety in a child's life. So for those reasons, we ask for favorable report on Senate Bill 413, and thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the panel? I just want to say one more thing. You all may remember or recognize that we actually, in our relief plan that will be before us tomorrow on the floor, has $3 million to Maryland Legal Services. It's related to the housing issues, of course, but what I want to say is that it's a one-time amount in 21. So some of the solutions that we're going to need for this, including this bill, are more long-term and on an annual basis. Clearly, we're already taking a few steps, and in my opinion, we need to do more. But anything else? Okay, thank you all very much. Next up is Senator King, Senate Bill 433, Community College State Funding Revision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have before you Senate Bill 443. Over the many years since CADE funding formula was passed by the legislature, our community colleges have experienced several fiscal years where full funding was not realized. Community colleges offer accessible, affordable, and quality educational choices for Maryland citizens, but the continued rebasing of the CADE formula has placed a larger burden on student tuition costs, making higher education less affordable and less accessible to those students who need it the most. To add insult to injury, our public four-year institutions have received millions of dollars for cost of living increases, but cost of living increases are not considered in the CADE formula. Senate Bill 443 will require that the CADE formula include all non-capital appropriations designated for the general operation of our four-year public institutions, regardless of where these appropriations are budgeted. This will include personnel-related appropriations. The CADE formula is the state's portion of the partnership to ensure that all students can gain the degrees and skills needed in today's workforce. And I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 443.
Thank you, Senator.
I have with me Mr. Brad Phillips from the Maryland Association of Community Colleges.
Yes.
Hi. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
My name is Brad Phillips, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Maryland Association of Community Colleges. And while this is an important bill for the presidents and our community colleges, I will be brief. From a policy perspective, the state's financing of public higher education is one of its most effective tools at generating long-term and meaningful social and economic mobility. Yet we continue to wrestle with equitable funding from the state. And as Senator King has just described, thank you, Senator, for introducing this bill. What happens when funding is excluded from the CADE funding formula that is going to the four-year institutions? And this bill closes that loophole. It helps also with our students and our county support, because whenever the equity gap grows by putting money on the table for four-year institutions but not letting it flow through the formula, our students and our counties have to make up that additional funding so that students can access a quality education and transfer seamlessly into their four-year institutions. We think community colleges is such a strategic asset, and our presidents really hope that as we move out of this pandemic and into the economic recovery, that the state realizes our full potential and supports our work. And with that, thank you very much. We encourage a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Drew Jabin.
Thank you, members of the committee. Chair, I'm not sure if the vice chair is there. Again, for the record, Drew Jabin on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties, here in support of Senate Bill 433. As always, you have my written testimony. I will be brief. This is a great bill. It would clarify and strengthen the funding connection between two-year and four-year schools. Community colleges are a super valuable asset to our state and local communities. When state funding lags for community colleges, additional pressure builds on already tight county budgets and on student tuition. With unemployment rates at an all-time high due to the pandemic, community colleges have proven again and again to be an important driver for our state's economic recovery. This bill offers a pragmatic clarification to ensure that community colleges are not left behind. Again, it's a sensible, good bill, and MACO urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for the senator or panel? Thank you all very much. Next up, Senator Edwards. Allegheny County Video Lottery Terminals Distribution of Proceeds. This one feels all too familiar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator Edwards, District 1. For the record, talk about Senate Bill 452. I'm not going to take a whole lot of your time. This bill has been in the Senate, actually passed it in 2019 and 2020 unanimously. For those of you who are new to the committee, back in the 1990s, Cass Taylor was the Speaker of the House, and Governor Schaefer in the early 90s was when he was governor. They were real good buddies, and they were trying to look to how can we do something to help stimulate a little economic development. And Western Maryland came up with the idea of building a resort center at Rocky Gap. So with Maryland and Medco and the county putting money in, they built a resort center. And Medco basically ran it till you get up to about 2012. If you talk to Bob Brennan, who was head honcho at Medco, who's now, I understand, going to retire, which is sorry to see because I think he did a tremendous job, does a tremendous job at Medco. Basically, we're ready to shut the doors. They couldn't find a buyer, wasn't generating revenues. So what do we do to try to stimulate some activity there? So that's right from the time we did gaming. We passed for the sites for the gaming, and in order to get someone to come into Rocky Gap, we had to do a couple little special things to make it a little bit more enticing, for a better way to say it. And we got a company to come in. They come in and started things out, and then basically sold it out to Golden Entertainment, who runs it now, who has operations in Nevada and quite a few other places throughout the country. So very simply what it does, it's one of the major employers in Allegheny County. Total roughly 500 jobs in peak time. Some of those are part-time. It's about 340 full-time jobs, which is a tremendous asset to Allegheny County for employment opportunities, and one of the better paying businesses in in the county. The county gets a host fee, which is very important to the county for being a host, as the other areas in the state that have casinos do get host fees. Thing is now in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, at least in Pennsylvania, they've come up with some of these, what they call mini casinos. And most of the players, if you look at license plates, et cetera, and they even document this, actually come from West Virginia and Pennsylvania, because if you look at the map, there's only like 6 miles between Pennsylvania and West Virginia where Rocky Gap sits. And with the implementation of these new sites and sports betting where they do them in Pennsylvania and West Virginia on those sites also, we think it's going to probably have some kind of an impact if we can't keep Rocky Gap competitive with those states. So briefly, in a nutshell, what the bill does is we need to have an amendment, Mr. Chairman, because we passed the bill last year, and if it would have passed the House and got signed by the governor, it worked out pretty good because it has 58.25% to the operator where it should have been 48.25%. So we need to have that amendment, how that got past our excellent staff, but it did. You can look at the chart. Licensee currently gets 50. They would drop down to 48.25. VLT ownership would be 10. The State Lottery and Gaming Commission go from 1 to and stay at 1, where if we don't do this, they'd go to 2. The Education Trust Fund, which everybody's interested and concerned about getting money or not getting money, actually, if we don't pass this, they'll lose 1% in 2023. And what this does is takes the sunset off of the bill. It's a 10-year sunset, so we just eliminate the sunset and continue with these new numbers. The purse dedication account go from 2.5, it will go up to 6 in 23 if we don't change it. If we do, it goes at 2.5. Local impact fee would go up from 3.75 to 5.5, and the small minority women and business owned, instead of going to 1.5, stays at 0.75. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, you were pretty involved in some of these negotiations last year. Everybody basically agreed to this. Now I understand a lot of these horse people are coming in and going to oppose it because they're losing money because of the pandemic. Well, I could say the same thing about the economics on the casino itself and the county because of the host fee. So, you know, basically everybody agreed last year. We'd like to get this passed, even though the 10-year, I think 2022 or 2023 one would really take effect. So I would just ask for support of the bill and be happy to try to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Senator. PJ Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is PJ Hogan, representing Golden Entertainment and Rocky Gap Casino. Chairman Gazon, Vice Chairman Rosapep, and members of the powerful Budget and Tax Committee. Senator Edwards explained the bill, the history and the bill very, very well. Just a couple quick points. We are the smallest of the 6 casinos. We are the only casino that is sandwiched, as Senator Edwards pointed out, between 2 other gaming states, West Virginia to our south, Pennsylvania to our north. On page 2 of my written testimony was the chart that Senator Edwards referred to. I think it makes it very simple and clear to look at this chart and see where things are now, see where things would be if you don't act after 2023, what would happen in 2023, and what this bill proposes with the amendment that Senator Edwards explained. This has been a successful experiment. The experiment has worked. We want to make it permanent now. As Senator Edwards said, there was a lot of negotiations last year. The operator is willing to have their tax increased 1.75%. It maintains the Education Trust Fund at 32%. I think it's fair, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Please ask you to take the same action you took last year.
Thank you. That is on the favorable side. Questions there? Okay. Now on the unfavorable, Bob Enton.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Robert Etton on behalf of the Maryland Thoroughbred Horse Association. You know, the MTHA, the Maryland Jockey Club, and the Maryland Horse Breeders are all signed up today in opposition to the bill. I did have a conversation with the sponsor earlier today and told him we would be coming in against the bill and told him why. You know, on account of the pandemic, Maryland's thoroughbred racetracks have been closed. In March, it'll be for 1 year, closed to the public. While we've been able to run, we've been closed to the public. The purse dedication account, which is what we rely on to have a competitive thoroughbred racing model in the state of Maryland, is down 30%. 30%. They're correct. Last year, we did discuss this bill. We did work out what we thought would be a compromise for the long term, but everything's changed. Everything is upside down. And for right now, this bill, if you left the law alone, the proponents could still come in 2022. They could still come in 2023 and change the law. There is no need to lock this in right now. And for us, it's a $1.9 million hit to the purse dedication account. You know, this 10-year deal that was entered into was to give them time to get on board, but every other casino is at the 6% number. When you talk about the entity itself, Golden Entertainment owns it. They acquired the property in 2016. They knew what the deal was. And this is a Nevada casino, which is a publicly traded company, which pays a very nice dividend and has seen a very nice rise in its stock. I'm not saying that this isn't something that can't be discussed in the future, but for right now, the last thing for the thoroughbred racing industry that we need this year, or what we need to lock in right now, is a $1.9 million hit. And that equates to 20 racing days. 20 racing days. It's almost 20% of our days of racing. So we just don't see the need to lock this in. We've got sports betting out there and a lot of other issues that are going to impact racing going forward. And we just would hope that the committee would give this bill an unfavorable report, and let's come back next year and look at it. There's no need for this legislation as far as the percentage goes to lock it in right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Cricket Goodall. Ms. Goodall, are you there? Well, let's keep moving and maybe she'll join us. Michael Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Mike Johansson on behalf of the Maryland Jockey Club. First, let me thank the committee last year for the work you did on behalf of this industry related to the Pimlico and Laurel Park project. I do acknowledge the work that we did last year with the committee and the sponsor, to fashion something that I don't think we truly loved, but at the same time, we appreciated the movement. I think Bob mentions the unpredictability. Right now, the Maryland Stadium Authority is fully in charge of the Pimlico and Laurel project. But, given some delays with procurement, we still aren't any further along in the cost of the project. We are hoping that everything stays within budget, but certainly there's some uncertainty there. Second, Bob mentioned sports betting. Hopefully we'll have an answer to what the sports betting scene will look like. But one thing we are concerned about, today in the state of Maryland, the only mobile betting that you can legally conduct today is mobile betting on horse racing. So, we do anticipate there could be some cannibalization of our product when sports betting comes out. So I think Bob's request that, maybe with respect to just the impact on the PDA, that piece gets pushed to a different year before it's locked in. maybe the rest of the changes could move forward with that open item being discussed later. So we do thank you for your work last year, and thank you, Senator Edwards, for your support on that as well. And we'll work with you as you know, but we just want to raise the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. David Richardson.
Chairman Gonzone, Vice Chairman Rosapep, it's nice being before you guys again. Good to see you guys. This pandemic has been tough on us all, so it's good to see everybody. I want to underscore what Bob said. Every industry in Maryland has been decimated by the pandemic. Not only have we seen a 30% decrease in the purse dedication funds, but our live handle, which is really our lifeblood, has decreased 50% from 122 million to $63 million last year. We had no fans at the Preakness, which is our one big day of the year. We're not sure about this year's Preakness. So the racing industry really has been decimated. As Mike Johansson commented on, we have the 30-year capital plan that the industry together solved a generational challenge. And part of that plan is to enter into a 30-year agreement, which hasn't been done yet. And that 30-year agreement, when we originally looked at the numbers for, whether this was feasible or not, included the sunset and the revenue we would realize as from the Rocky Gap Casino. So this proposal, what it does, it does take $2 million in the out years out of the thoroughbred racing industry and subsidizes a casino in Western Maryland. So we respectfully ask the committee to take a second look at this, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Has Ms. Goodall arrived?
Senator, I show her as being here, but I think she's having some technical difficulties. I can't do anything.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I'm sure we can get some written testimony. Any questions for those in opposition? Okay, thank you all very much. Next up, Senator West, Public Safety Police Athletic League Grant Fund Establishment, Senate Bill 463. Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to be with you. It's nice to literally lay eyes on my former seatmate in JPR, Senator Young, who I haven't seen since last year. Nice to see you. So this bill is about the police athletic leagues. They are summer after-school drop-in programs which provide a safe, positive, and developing atmosphere for young people between the ages of 8 and 17 who live in areas which are crime and violence prone. They feature fun and enriching daily programs of athletics, creative activities, and personal development. Police and community volunteers join in supervising the activities. In Baltimore County alone, there are 9 PAL locations. The PAL programs break barriers, change attitudes, and build meaningful relationships by providing opportunities for youth and police officers to positively engage with one another. The state of Maryland has supported PAL programs through the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention. In 2018 alone, the Hogan administration awarded $250,000 to 6 jurisdictions to start PAL programs: in Annapolis, Baltimore City, Cambridge, Salisbury, Hagerstown, and Cecil County. As these programs give police an opportunity to get involved in children's lives in a meaningful way, the PAL programs are especially important to today, after a year in which very negative messages about police officers were transmitted to Maryland's youth. Senate Bill 463 sets up the Police Athletic League Grant Fund in GOCAP and requires annual state funding in the amount of $500,000. It also directs the executive director of GOCAP to establish procedures for local governments and organizations to apply for grants from the fund. In this way, support for local police athletic leagues will be established as an ongoing program of the government of Maryland. This is a very modest measure, but an important one, as we seek ways of healing the acrimony between the state law enforcement community and its citizens, particularly citizens of color. I appreciate the committee's consideration of Senate Bill 463, and of course would be willing to answer any questions of the committee members.
Thank you, Senator. David Rose.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Rose. I'm the president of Baltimore County Fraternal Order Police Lodge 4. And the Maryland State FOP and the Baltimore County Fraternal Order Police are both in favor of the passing of this legislation. The Police Athletic League is an important program for building relationships between youth and police officers in the community. The PAL program allows for non-traditional law enforcement and youth interaction that often leads to mentoring and the breaking down of barriers that have become visible in the recent years. In the beginning of the Great Recession in 2009, when funding priorities had to be made, many of these programs were deemed a low priority in budgetary times. Funding was cut and PAL facilities were either closed or the officers were reassigned, sometimes both. At the time, this seemed like a prudent managerial decision. However, a decade later, we now deal with the unforeseen consequences of what was probably the most important purpose of the PAL centers, building police, community, and youth relationships. We've since lost a whole generation to police positivity and community relationships. Hopefully, with the passing of Senate Bill 463, there will be sufficient funding to allow this program to stay viable and open. Only when we can move forward in rebuilding the relationships that we took for granted in the past. And I thank you very much, urge your support, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the senator or his witness? Okay, thank you all very much. Next up, Senator Zucker, Senate Bill 480, Income Tax Distribution Tax Clinks for Low-Income Marylanders.
Senator, there was one more witness.
Oh, yes, you're right, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, I see Ms. Goodall. I think, do we have her by phone?
No, there's Jeffrey Breslin for this,
Oh.
Mr. Yeah.
Oh.
Boys and Girls Club.
Yep, I got it. Yep. Boy, I'm messing up all around. Thank you for grabbing it. And I think we do have Ms. Goodall afterwards on phone. Is that right? For the previous bill, we did finally get.
No, she left.
Oh,
She
okay.
left. Okay. Technology, right?
Yeah, right. Mr. Breslin, I apologize.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I'll be brief, but my name is Jeff Breslin. I'm the CEO for Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Baltimore, and I also represent the Maryland Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, more than 35 clubs across the state, serving over 5,000 kids. Here today to voice support for Senate Bill 463 to enshrine $500,000 in funding for police athletic programs. I'm also here to share Boys and Girls Clubs around the country are often homes of PAL programs. At our clubs, we implement a number of programs in partnership with local law enforcement to create not just positive change, but real, authentic conversation between young people and local law enforcement. Our clubs are rooted in paid professional staff and supplemented by chartered PAL programs. This program and this investment would be a great opportunity for us to continue to move the ball forward and continue to move the state forward in relationships between young people and law enforcement. And lastly, as many of you may know, the work of Boys and Girls Clubs, over 4 million kids nationwide are members of Boys and Girls Clubs. 54% when surveyed say the club literally saved their life. And I think we have an opportunity through this bill to bring not just the impact of clubs, but the impact of a great relationship in a 2021 manner between young people and law enforcement, both in clubs and also in other police athletic and activity league programs. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, any questions for Mr. Breslin? Okay. Now I do believe we can go on to Senator Zucker. Tax clinks for low-income Marylanders. Senator Zucker.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the Budget and Taxation Committee. Senator Zucker here to present Senate Bill 480. It's tax clinics for low-income Marylanders. I first wanted to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, to thank Dean Tobin, Dean Weiss, Susan Lawrence, Deputy Comptroller Bernardi, Janice Shee, and in particular,
We've lost you, Senator Zucker.
Delegate Sandy Rosenberg, who's been the sponsor of this piece of legislation.
Senator, we lost you for a minute, and I think we've lost you again.
Can you see me okay?
We can see you, but we couldn't hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, often I've been told I should be seen and not heard. So, but in this case, I think it's important to be heard. I was just saluting Delegate Rosenberg, who had put this in last year and made it through the House. It wasn't cross-filed, but then the global pandemic hit. So we had to adjourn early. This is, it's interesting. I wear many hats in the state, and one of them, when I'm not in session, is working in the comptroller's office. And I've seen the great work that they've done on state income tax, being able to file that for free. But I'll tell you, there's still some anxiousness that Marylanders have when it comes to your tax institutions, whether it be the IRS or the comptroller's office. The comptroller often says that when he got elected and he would receive correspondence from his own agency, a shiver would go down his spine. But this is one of the ways where they could provide both state and federal tax assistance while offering legal advice to low-income Marylanders. It would be a partnership with the University of Maryland Law School, University of Baltimore Law School, and Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Services. When we talk about tax fairness, that also means tax assistance, and this is one of the ways to do that. There is a fiscal note attached, but sometimes something so important is worth an investment. There is an amendment. It would split the money to each institution by a third each. And with that, I will turn it over to the panel.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome, Dean Tobin.
Thank you, Chair Gazzone and Vice Chair Rosapep and members of the committee, and Donald Tobin and the Dean at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. I'm pleased to join Senator Zucker in expressing my strong support for SB 480. And I specifically want to thank you, Senator Gazzone, also for your strong support of Maryland legal services. This is just so important at this time in our country. We have a crisis concerning equal access to justice for members of our community, and there has been focus by this legislator and others in the state about how to help people who are disadvantaged and by the system. And one key area where that happens to low-income Marylanders is in tax controversies, because that's a place where they don't have representation. We, all of us as panelists, receive grants from the IRS to support low-income taxpayer clinics, but these grants only enable us to assist Maryland taxpayers with a Maryland tax issue when they have an underlying federal claim. So the IRS grant doesn't support our representing Maryland taxpayers who don't have a federal tax issue, and it doesn't support the outreach efforts we try to do throughout the state to help Maryland taxpayers with Maryland tax issues. The legal representation, this benefits both the individuals but also the state, because our expectation is that the tax clinic would provide improved outcomes, but also create administrative efficiencies for the comptroller's office. As a Maryland attorney, I help in our tax clinic, and I quickly learned that the state liability, especially with interest and penalties, can be devastating for a taxpayer. It's not just the federal. And I also saw a complex state tax system that's just very difficult for an individual taxpayer to navigate. I don't think there's much you can do about that. Tax collection is like almost no other process. It is a civil action by the government. So a litigant actually has to provide the evidence. They have the burden of proof. Most individual taxpayers just aren't trained to do that. And in those cases, lawyers are a lifeline. So when I think about tax administration, our goal is to get it right. A fair tax system collects a fair amount, and providing representation to low-income taxpayers just ensures that happens. SB 480 ensures that hardworking Marylanders with tax disputes get representation, and I strongly urge the committee to provide a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Ronald Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to join Senator Zucker and my colleagues Donald Tobin and Jenna Shee in support of SB 480. I associate myself fully with the remarks of Dean Tobin, and I should point out he's too modest to say it, but he's a nationally recognized tax expert, tax scholar, and so he speaks with great authority on the intricacies of the system. And as he points out, our clinics do serve Marylanders currently, but not in standalone Maryland tax disputes. So we can really augment our service to low-income Marylanders and aid in the administration of the tax laws with this additional funding. I'll just add one further point. Both of our schools are public law schools, the only two law schools in the state of Maryland, of course. And this funding would enable us to serve our students better. We're training students through these clinics, giving them commitment to public service, public interest law, and expertise in the tax laws. And the students who go through these clinics will graduate to become some of them tax lawyers who will serve Marylanders well. So for all these reasons, I join my colleagues and I thank Senator Zucker for sponsoring Delegate Rosenberg's bill here. I urge favorable reporting of Senate Bill 480. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenna Shee.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
Zoni, Vice Chair Rosa Pep, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Janice Shee, and I'm the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, the oldest and largest pro bono provider of civil legal services in the state of Maryland. I am testifying in support of this legislation with amendment. So members of the committee have my written testimony regarding SB 480. On page 2 are two typical client stories illustrating the types of clients that we see and why this legislation is so important. But I'd like to share one more story, and this is Miss Doris. Miss Doris is 94. She is partially blind, a retired domestic worker in the beginning stages of dementia. Her only income is Social Security. Her husband, now deceased, took care of her finances. When he died, she understandably fell behind in her tax filing. Her daughter, who has power of attorney, was able to get her back into compliance, but she also learned that Miss Doris was a victim of financial exploitation. Some friends of her mother had asked her to redeem lottery tickets for them, and Miss Doris, not understanding what was going on, was just trying to be helpful. She did not know that this was going to be income to her, leaving her with a big tax bill rising with penalties, interest, ballooning up to $60,000, $586, and a lien on her home. Ms. Doris came to MVLS, where a volunteer was able to assist her with an offering compromise for only $50. So I repeat, Ms. Doris, 94, partially blind, retired domestic worker, beginning stages of dementia, tax bill of over $60,000, resolved with $50. She could not have done this on her own. So, and as you have heard earlier from my colleagues, as well as earlier with MLSD, clients that are represented do much better, both for themselves and with the system. So, and this is why SB 480 is so important. Clients with Maryland tax issues are scared and confused. They're afraid of going to jail. And as Senator Zucker pointed out, they're anxious about dealing with the Maryland comptroller, oftentimes entering into unsustainable installment agreements just to get off the phone. So we can help them. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. Sharon Bernardi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. I'm Sharon Bernardi, Deputy Comptroller of Maryland, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 480. I also want to thank Senator Zucker for sponsoring this important legislation. When I joined the Office of the Comptroller in 1997, I was the first attorney of color. As a hearing officer, I saw the difficulty many taxpayers had understanding tax laws and representing themselves in proceedings. I made a personal commitment to ensuring that there is fair and equal access in tax administration. And in 2015, when Comptroller Francho appointed me as Deputy Comptroller, the first person of color to hold this position in the agency's 170-year history, I became ever more diligent. Since Comptroller Francho was elected to office, he has supported this mission by expanding our community outreach in underrepresented communities. He also makes it a priority for our staff to work with taxpayers in need, always delivering service with compassion and empathy. Unfortunately, it is undisputed that tax matters are complicated, and addressing these matters without representation compounds the issue. Over the years, I've worked with tax professionals and advocacy groups to expand access and increase representation for low-income taxpayers. And thanks to an impromptu discussion with Dean Tobin at an alumni event, the idea of state funding for low-income tax clinics at both the University of Maryland and University of Baltimore Law Schools took root. Just as every member of our agency is called to be mindful of the 3 R's, respect, responsiveness, results, when executing our mission, this bill does the same by allowing tax experts at our state's law schools and the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service help low-income taxpayers enjoy the same access to legal representation that is afforded to wealthier Marylanders. And for these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report for SB 480. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. Robin McKinney.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin McKinney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cash Campaign of Maryland. CASH stands for Creating Assets, Savings, and Hope, and we help low to moderate income individuals and families in Baltimore City to become, and across the state, to be more financially secure. Here in enthusiastic support of Senate Bill 480, the Cash Campaign does taxes for free for about 25,000 low-income taxpayers across the state. And we work incredibly closely with the Comptroller's Office, with the University of Maryland School of Law, University of Baltimore, and the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. We have an incredible partnership because everybody can do their piece the best, right? And so there are cases where someone might need a tax return done, and as we get into it, we realize they have back tax issues. This happens very frequently, or that they have a controversy issue with the IRS or with the state. We love having the partnership that we can work together and make those referrals. We always have far more demand than we can ever serve. In fact, our what we call back tax clinics, as you may know, the earned income tax credit, you can go back for 3 years, and if you owe, well, there's no expiration, right? There's always a chance for someone to circle back on that. We never advertise, and our appointments are sold out every single time, just by word of mouth. And so the demand far exceeds what we're able to provide. Another new partnership that we are just starting on, along with our legal partners, is helping folks who are incarcerated, both to access their stimulus payments, as well as to deal with back tax issues. So thinking about folks who are going to be getting out in the next year or two, making sure that they're able to start with a clean financial slate when they're able to come out of incarceration. And again, those are very complex issues, and we need our legal partners to be funded and to be there with us. So with that, I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 480.
Thank you. Glenn Frost. Glenn Frost.
I don't see him on, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any questions for the senator or the panel? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator Kagan, Senate Bill 376, Maryland Nonprofit Development Center Program, Nonprofit Interest-Free Micro-Bridge Loan Account Funding. You win for the longest title of the day.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. Are we good? Do you have me?
You are all ready.
All right. I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. You all helped enact NIMBLE, because I love acronyms, the Nonprofit Interest-Free Micro-Bridge Loan Bill, in 2017. The plan was to create a revolving loan fund of up to $1 million and allow nonprofits who were having cash flow challenges get grants, loans, interest-free loans of up to $25,000, but only if they had in writing confirmed grants or contracts coming from federal, state, county, or municipal government. Not a, we're having our gala next month, or the Smith Foundation always gives us a bunch of money next month or anything. But it was too often our government reimbursements are delayed, they're slow, and sometimes nonprofits have to spend the money before they get it reimbursed. Despite all that, they still have to make payroll. They still have to cover the expenses of their mission. Now we're in COVID and things are even harder. I know that you all know how important the nonprofit sector is in every nook and cranny of Maryland. 10% of the workforce is in the nonprofit sector, and it's about 12.4% of our local economy. So here's the thing. That $1 million for the revolving loan fund needed to be snagged by this committee during budget negotiation and reconciliation. And so we extracted a commitment for funding in FY21. The problem was that the amendment was not crafted very precisely and none of us caught it. So there is up to 5% and not to exceed $1 million that was to be set aside. Unfortunately, the up to should have been up to $1 million, not up to 5%, because up to 5% also includes zero. And unfortunately, in this year's budget, there is zero. So how has Nimble been operating since this bill passed? Well, the Department of Commerce has been doing a tremendous job. Thanks to Rhonda Ray and Secretary Schultz and the whole team, Darla Garrett and others, because they took the $187,500 that Maryland nonprofits Henry Bogdan basically found in the seat cushions of the state budget and have been able to make that successful. You will hear from two people that have already gotten revolving funds and the difference that that has made. Even fully funded, we're still only talking about, as the Department of Commerce includes in their testimony, you're still only talking about a max of 34 grants at any one time if they go for the maximum of $25,000. There have been a number of grants that have already gone out and the money has turned over multiple times. The Department of Commerce has made it very smooth sailing. They've done a wonderful job in helping people navigate this process. Low bar to entry, but they've got to have confirmed government grants or contracts. Just a couple more things I want to remember to mention. Nimble passed the Senate unanimously, and again, anything we can do for the nonprofit sector in these challenging times with just a modest amount of money, and this is a one-time grant. If we put this aside one time, because it's a revolving loan fund, the money will be there. So,
Senator, all we're doing is correcting that one sort of technical error that was in the bill. That's it.
Well, but we got to put aside the $1 million.
No, I understand.
So yes, that is it. So it's a pretty simple bill and it's pretty important, and the impact is felt in every jurisdiction. With that, Henry Bogdan from Maryland Nonprofits is going to be the lead proponent, followed by Leon Seaman and Kim Jones. And I think Elise Salzberg is also going to weigh in briefly. So thank you, colleagues. Happy to take questions if there are any at the end or whenever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Should go, Mr. Bogdan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Henry Bogdan from Maryland Nonprofits. I am not going to pretend that I can do a better job explaining this than the senator. I think you hit it on the head. We're correcting a mistake or a lack of clarity in the language that was in the bill back in 2017. When you passed that bill unanimously, the fiscal note showed you that that money would start to flow in fiscal 21 out of the VLT fund, and it didn't. And when we discovered the issue and the problem, it was too late in the COVID shortened session to get anything done about it. I join her in saluting the Department of Commerce. They've been doing a great job. They streamlined the process. When you need one of these loans, it means you need cash immediately because you're not getting paid on a grant or contract. You can't wait in a queue for 6 months, and you can't go through a 30-day or 45-day process trying to negotiate a loan. And they've made that work. This is a serious problem. There are a great number of loans and grants from state and local government, and sometimes federal funds being administered through state and local government, where you have to start an upfront cost before you're going to get paid. There is one state agency that if you get a grant from them of $50,000 or less, you can only bill quarterly. So you have to front basically 4 months or more of your costs before you get paid, which really basically limits the pool of organizations that can get involved. I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'm sure many of you have probably heard these complaints from your constituents, and I know there are witnesses behind me who can speak to that experience. So we just urge you to give this bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bogdan. You're welcome to come over here anytime and find 187,000 in my.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. The senator told the Department of Legislative Services she was really very interested in them finding some money. And they did find that money floating back and forth between agencies in the budget that year. All I did was help them get the language into the bill. Thank you.
You evidently have a lot of useful Kim Jones.
Good afternoon, Senator Gazzoni and Senator Rosapep. I'm Kim Jones, CEO of the Nonprofit Village, an incubator and shared space for nonprofits. We're based in Montgomery County, but we do serve the entire state and region, and we're in support of SB 376. Since 2008, we've incubated more than 100 nonprofits. We've provided training to about 150 a year, and we house 43 on site currently. And our vision is to ensure nonprofits have the business knowledge and the resources that they need in order to grow their capacity, increase their sustainability, and go on and thrive. So we're the link to resources that they need, and one of those is the nonprofit interest-free microbridge loan, the NIMBLE program. And I remember when Senator Kagan first introduced this concept, and I thought, oh, how simple and affordable, and what a way to reduce the financial anxiety experienced by organizations while they're waiting for funding that's been awarded but just hasn't been released. And you know that we work on razor thin margins in the nonprofit community. So we continue to adjust to this crisis, the COVID crisis, racial reckoning, economic fallout. It's just even more important now to continue this short and long-term support. We conduct a lot of marketing on the program. It's on our website. We put it into all of our communications. I've seen it help a lot of solid organizations that just hit a snag, and then it came our turn. We applied because of a delay in a county contract, and it provided us the security at a very critical time. Our liaison at the Maryland Department of Commerce was incredibly supportive. She answered every question. We have a very conservative and risk-averse board, and everything we threw at her, she answered. We went ahead and applied, and it was just very quick and easy. So it's just a game changer for nonprofits in Maryland. And we're at this crossroads where we can lead with intent, ensuring the expansion of the program, making sure that the valuable resources in the hands of nonprofits. We can lead the nation in an era of racial equity by promoting this to more nonprofits led by people of color in the state whose organizations are probably on the cusp of, if it's not just furloughs, it could be a lot worse. So it's an economic driver helping nonprofits sustain operations. Nonprofit business development is vital to our recovery in Maryland, and NIMBLE plays an important part targeting tax-exempt organizations that provide critically important services. So we appreciate the continued support, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Leon Seaman.
Hi, I'm Leon Seaman. I'm the Executive Director of Adventure Theater MTC out of Montgomery County, Maryland. What we're really talking about here is that sometimes we all need a hand. Sometimes when things are tough, you just need that extra, that little bit of help that helps you get through it. When I first arrived at Adventure Theater, we were in financial distress. The organization was critically low on cash. And despite the impactful programming that we had that our community valued, we were at risk of ceasing to exist simply from cash flow. We were clawing it out one day at a time, playing shell games, forced into bad decisions in order to get by. By the time the Nimble program came out in the fall of 2017, it was immediately obvious its value. And we were the very first organization to receive a $25,000 loan from the program while we were waiting on the second half of our annual government Maryland State Art Council grant. That allowed us to start shedding some of the predatory contracts and put the organization on a stable footing. And that got us through a gap. That helping hand was the turning point of our organization. And I can't understate, this amount of funding helps 36 organizations at a time, but there will never be a dearth of organizations that need this help. When we had our fire in March of 2018, we came back and said, is it available? And for both good and bad, it was gone. There were other 36 organizations that were using it at that time. So solidifying the pot of money allows as many nonprofits to get this helping hand as possible. And so for this reason, we ask for a favorable report on SB 376.
Thank you very much. Elise Salzberg. You're muted still.
Okay, there we go.
Can begin.
Yep. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony in favor of increasing the amount of money available in the Nimble Fund. My name is Elise Salzberg, and I have worked as a fundraising consultant to dozens of nonprofit organizations in Maryland since 2000. I'm testifying today on behalf of my clients and the thousands of other small to medium-sized nonprofits in Maryland. With my assistance over the years, my clients have received dozens of grants and contracts from various state and local government agencies, ranging from a $2,000 grant from a county council special appropriation to a $1.2 million contract with MSDE. The problem is that from the time that the nonprofit receives the email saying, congratulations, your grant application has been approved, to the time that the organization actually receives a check can be many, many months. And often the organization is expected to start delivering the services immediately, even though they don't actually have the funds in hand. And then either monthly or quarterly, the organization submits copies of invoices and canceled checks for reimbursement. And then you have to wait several more months before you actually get reimbursed. Meanwhile, the organization is expected to continue operating the program and expending the funds with the mindset that, well, we're going to get reimbursed eventually. That works for organizations that have solid financial reserves and ample cash flow, but that doesn't describe most nonprofit organizations that I know about, which are usually operating with extremely tight budgets, very limited cushions to cover their expenses. When it takes several months to receive money that has been committed to them by a state or local government entity, it can put an organization over the edge, as you just heard from some of my colleagues. They simply do not have the capacity to absorb the delays in reimbursements. They have trouble making payroll and paying their vendors, and thereby diminishing the effectiveness of their services to needy Marylanders. A loan from the Nimble Fund would be a godsend to these organizations, but this fund can only fulfill its purpose if the nonprofits that need it have ready access to it. Increasing the amount available in the Nimble Revolving Loan Fund to $1 million will ensure that this happens. A quick turnaround loan of up to $25,000 would go a long way towards solidifying the important services that my clients and other Maryland nonprofit organizations provide while they are waiting for payments from various state and local government agencies. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony.
No, I was muted. Thank you very much. Any questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. That concludes today's hearing. Members, couple things. One, we have another hearing tomorrow in the afternoon, but on the floor tomorrow, starting at 11, we've got two big bills. We've got the HBCU bill. Senator Griffiths will be the floor leader, and the relief bill, which I'll try to continue to handle, and I'll call on those who might know a specific piece if necessary. And other than that, I'm not sure when we're going to do our next voting. I think next week. I mean, obviously, we've delayed voting for the important work of getting through the relief bill in particular and the HBCU. So hopefully we'll see final passage of those on Friday, and we will then start systematically moving our way through the rest of the bills that we've already heard and the ones that we will hear in the future. Other than that, does anybody have any questions for me? Just so you know, tomorrow on the relief bill, I'm going to have one large amendment. Will have, I think, 10 components to it, just to clean up a number of things along the way. Some of you have already talked about, some of them with you brought some things to my attention. Other will be new. I don't think it dramatically changes anything. Hopefully everyone will agree that they all make everything better. And I still do not have the final amendment copy yet, but hopefully you'll see that soon on your computers. And I know I will get a copy to Senator Edwards shortly, I hope, as the ranking member. Okay, I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much. Good job today.